a day after Iran launched its largest ever ballistic missile attack on Israel. Despite some strikes on Israeli bases, the damage was thankfully minimal. Still, Israel is vowing retribution as President Biden implores the Israelis to not retaliate against Iran's nuclear sites. All of this as Israel continues its campaign to the north in Lebanon, trying to dismantle the Iran-backed organization Hezbollah, which the United States considers to be a terrorist group. Let's bring in CNN's Jim Sciutto, who's in Tel Aviv, and Ben Wiedemann in Beirut, Lebanon. And Ben, let's start with you. Your team just heard several loud explosions in Beirut. What exactly is going on in Lebanon right now?
Well, what we heard is just a few minutes ago, some sharp blasts. And I'm going to step out of the way. I think you can still perhaps see some of the smoke that's still there. This is the heart of Beirut. This is not the southern suburbs. This is the general area where you will find the prime ministry and you will find the fortunately currently empty CNN bureau. As I said, this is the second time since Sunday night that there have been Israeli airstrikes outside of the heart of Beirut. And just about 40 minutes before that, we heard three very large explosions from the southern suburbs, with smoke just wafting all over the city. We did the first strike that was about 40 minutes ago. The Israelis did put out a statement that they have struck a target in Beirut. Details to follow, the statement indicated. But this comes after a day in which we've seen intense fighting between Hezbollah and Israeli forces on Lebanese soil. And we've heard that at least 8 Israeli soldiers have been killed in those clashes. And so we haven't seen sort of the kind of full-scale ground presence by Israeli forces in South Lebanon. Perhaps they're probing at this point, but clearly despite Israel's severe pounding of the southern suburbs of the southern part of Lebanon along the border, clearly Hezbollah has a sizable presence and is able to challenge Israeli forces. Just one last detail, the Ministry of Health has come out with its total death toll over the last 24 hours. 46 dead, 85 wounded as this war continues. Jake?
All right, Ben, thanks so much. Jim, what are your sources telling you about how Israel might retaliate?
Well, there was a sense, Jake, last night that retaliation might come within hours of the Iranian missile barrage on Israel, including here in Tel Aviv. That passed, of course, last night passed, and we're getting quite late here as well. It appears that Israeli leaders may have taken a pause on this decision as they decide the next course. They made it quite public that they intend a response, serious consequences. But there is also some communication going back and forth between Tel Aviv and Washington about how that retaliation takes shape, with both private and very public messaging right up to President Biden indicating the U.S. does not want Israel to go so far as to attack Iran's nuclear facilities, that the U.S. fears that strike, and by the way, this is not a new fear of the U.S., that strike would greatly expand this war and might, frankly, drag the U.S. into an open conflict between Israel and Iran that the U.S. does not want to be a part of. And it's quite interesting, Jake, because just as U.S. officials were telling me when Israel sent those ground forces into southern Lebanon, or when Israel took out Hassan Nasrallah, just as they were telling me then, they were not involved in those strikes. They're signaling quite clearly now that the U.S. would not be involved in an Israeli strike on Iranian nuclear facilities if it were to choose that path.
All right, Jim Sciutto, Ben Wiedemann, thank you so much to both of you. Stay safe. Joining us now to discuss, retired U.S. Air Force General Philip Breedlove, the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. General, thanks so much for joining us. So Israel is warning that it has the means to strike anywhere in the Middle East. What do you see as Israel's most strategic next step? What would you advise Israel to do?
Well, thanks for having me on. And I think we have to go back to the first set of strikes earlier in the year where they shot 110 missiles in. And because the U.S. and others helped Israel intercept those, the effect was low and the United States implored Israel to not respond in a big way, and Israel led a very, very measured response. So now Iran is back with a much larger strike, and I think it's going to be hard this time to convince Israel to not have a more forceful reply. There are multiple things they could strike. They could strike the petrochemical infrastructure. They could strike military targets, and of course, they could strike the nuclear program.
The U.S. assesses that Israel has destroyed about 50% of Hezbollah's arsenal. What's your assessment of Iran's overall military strength, including its proxies, such as Hezbollah, such as Hamas, the Houthis, and the militias in Syria and Iraq? How strong are Israel's immediately surrounding enemies right now?
Well, clearly Israel has struck a blow, and the most important blow is they have eliminated essentially the top three echelons of leadership. And so the program is in disarray because the leaders are gone. But if you believe the numbers that people have quoted about Hezbollah's arsenal and Iran's arsenal, there is quite a few weapons left that could be sent Israel's way.
Today, we learned that 8 IDF soldiers have been killed in Lebanon since the offensive began. Would you assess that to be an unusual number for Israel in an offensive like this?
Well, it's a tragic number, but remember that urban warfare is the worst. We encountered this in Iraq and other places. When you are doing urban warfare in the modern world, this is the toughest mission you can throw at a land force. And so in some places, Israel is going in very cramped, confined spaces, and it makes it very tough on their soldiers. So this is not unusual. In fact, frankly, I would have expected the numbers to have been higher.
I also want to get your take on Israel's strategy at this stage. IDF forces are making quick, targeted incursions into Lebanon, urban warfare, as you note, then withdrawing. The IDF said today it also clashed with Hezbollah's forces at, quote, close range. Why do you think Israel is avoiding a full-on ground invasion right now, doing more of these targeted strikes?
Well, I think that we should be happy that that's the tack that they're taking. They're being very surgical. As you said before, they have hit some of the largest caches of weapons, and they have hit some of the command and control targets. You were talking at the top of the hour there with folks about the strikes into the heart of Beirut, and may I assure you that if they're doing that, they are targeting a very specific target and trying to minimize collateral damage. But remember, just like Hamas, Hezbollah wraps itself in innocence. It intends for an innocence to die. That way the world will control Israel for them.
Retired General Philip Breedlove, thank you so much, General.